Okay. So we're going to go over this one for a couple of days, today and tomorrow, because it's kind of long. But we're going to look at analyzing potential sources. So we're back to our sourcing cycle. We've kind of gone over recognition of need and specification of the need. And now we got a spec, so we're going to start looking for potential sources. Analyze potential sources of products or services is our task. So ISM looks at supply-based analysis. The first thing I look at is degrees of competition. So full and open competition. This is, well, it's called perfect competition, but there's never such a thing. Or open market, many suppliers to choose from and no collusion amongst the suppliers. This will put the sourcing event in the leverage or tactical categories, which we'll cover later, depending on the spend. So if it's high spend, it's leverage. If it's lower spend, then it's tactical. So that's full and open competition. The next one is limited competition in the supply base. These are suppliers that are in an oligarchy or a cartel. There's few suppliers that are available, and there's a degree of collusion amongst the suppliers on pricing. This is like oil, airlines, things like that. This is going to put it in either the bottleneck or the strategic categories, depending on the spend. And again, we'll cover these categories later. And then they've got something called technical competition. I mean, a supply base with a special product or technology. Patents usually limit the competition. There's only a few suppliers available. Usually it's a smaller spend, so it's going to be a bottleneck category. And then we've got single source and sole source. The difference is in a single source, we're choosing just one source. There's others in the competitive marketplace, but we're just going to go with a single source. Suppliers will compete on price when it's negotiated, and it allows you to move from one supplier to another. Sole source, on the other hand, is there's only one supplier in the market that can make the product. So this is a monopoly. And the buyer in this situation will have to get the supplier involved early in the design and use clean sheets and should cost analysis to control the price. This is a lot of our powertrain type suppliers. There might not be perfect monopolies, but there's only one or two suppliers that are making these parts, and they're tough to deal with. So the difference between a single source and a sole source is in a sole source, there is only one supplier. Multiple source, we're using two or more suppliers for the same product. We do this on occasion. The problem is if you got expensive molds, it's hard to do dual sourced. But it's a better strategy if the suppliers are having problems meeting demand. So you can go trade off from one source to the other. All right, so these are the market structure, degrees of competition, full and open, limited competition, oligarchy, technical competition, single source, sole source, and multiple source. The market structure is another type of competition in the marketplace. It's another way of looking at the marketplace. So monopoly, obviously there's one supplier and there's many buyers. Usually a monopoly is illegal under US antitrust law, which President Teddy Roosevelt put into place. But there are legal monopolies, such as your power companies, things like that. But if it's a legal monopoly, it's highly regulated. Then there's monopolistic competition, which is many sellers and many buyers. But the sellers create the illusion of competition or no competition through product differentiation, branding, quality. So there's no perfect substitutes. Consumers will perceive that there are non-price differences among the competitors, and there are very few barriers to entry or exit for the supply base. New suppliers can come and go in the suppliers. That's monopolistic competition. Examples include like breakfast cereals, shoes, clothing, that type of stuff, smartphones, soft drinks. Those are all monopolistic competition. It's all about branding. And the oligopolistic competition, which is the oligopoly, and price is controlled by an industry leader, usually a cartel. This is oil, airlines, that type of stuff. Each seller supplies a large portion of the products to the marketplace. There's high barriers to entry. It's not easy to get into the industry. And so the number of firms entering is very low. There's a lot of control over the prices. When one company lowers the price, others often follow suit. And examples include U.S. steel industry in the early 20th century, not so much anymore, but the oil industry today, OPEC, automobiles and airlines, truck engines, brakes and transmissions. Those are all oligopolistic competition type of industries. There's perfect competition, which is many buyers and many sellers. And the thing about this, it's not really perfect competition, but it's pretty close. All firms offer the same goods with the same characteristics and qualities. Large number of agents, buyers and sellers, there's no action from a single agent will affect the market structure, and no barriers, no entry or exit barriers. So this is, if you're in the commodities market, you're selling bushels of wheat that are graded or oil or something like that. It's usually a pure commodity because the products are all the same. There's no differentiation among them. And then there's another weird one called the monopsony, which is several sellers and one buyer. Usually the government is the buyer. This is like nationalized railroads, used to be the old AT&T phone companies, military equipment, fighter jets, etc. The government is the buyer, and there's a lot of sellers. There's one major employer and many workers seeking to gain employment in a geographical area. It can also be a monopsony. So in a monopoly, there's many buyers and one seller. In a monopsony, it's just the opposite. There's many sellers, but only one buyer. Okay, the nature of sources and their effects on procurement. So we don't deal with a lot of distributors at PACCAR because we usually don't want to put the middleman in there. But in a smaller firm, you'll deal with distributors a lot. When buying in bulk from a manufacturer, you'll eliminate the distributor markup, which is what PACCAR usually does. And when you need storage space or a wide variety of products, you buy from a distributor, or if you don't buy in that big a volume, the distributor will store the parts for you. So the classic one here is the electronics industry on circuit boards. Usually, if you're a smaller manufacturer, you'll buy the components from a electronics distributor. Large versus a small supplier. So small suppliers are usually nimbler and they can specialize in low volume goods, but they usually don't have a lot of money, so they can't do terms longer than 45 days. They can't afford the working capital loans. Large suppliers can keep up with growing volumes, are usually more competitive on price. And PACCAR usually will tend to go with larger suppliers because where our volumes are just so much higher. And then you've got national versus local. So buying from big national suppliers, there's greater competition, wider range of products, and better pricing. But local suppliers can offer faster delivery at lower cost, can tailor their business to the buyer's needs, and be interested in maintaining a high level of service. So PACCAR will use at the plants, they'll use the local smaller suppliers for e-buys, emergency buys for stuff they need on small volumes. But our contracts are usually set up with national large suppliers. Then international versus domestic. So domestic suppliers are easy to deal with. Transportation, communication is much easier with the domestic supplier. International suppliers can offer lower prices in a wider range of goods. But if you're going to deal with international suppliers, you may have to deal with exchange rates. So, the dollar versus the yen versus the euro, those rates, price levels change over time, and you got to have to deal with that. So if you're going to deal with international buyers, I don't know that PACCAR uses these a lot because we're so much larger, but a smaller firm will use a letter of credit, which ensures the international supplier that payment will be made by a bank. So you would go, the customer would go get a letter of credit from the bank and send it to the supplier. Also, a bill of exchange or a draft, just like a check on a bank. Those are two payment methods that smaller firms will use. Transportation costs and timing. Benefit of low-cost country sourcing must be weighed against the cost of longer transportation. You got customs clearance. You're usually going to ship it on the water. So air is fast. You can ship that stuff from Asia pretty quick in a day or two, but very spendy. Water is usually how you're going to go, and it takes 3-4 weeks. And then you got laws and regulations in international sourcing. You have to look at both our country and the supplier's countries, because there are some products that we cannot sell, usually having to do with military technology. And then, China's not going to sell the same thing to us. Internal versus external sources. Consider which items to buy, which to make for strategic reasons. So this is the make versus buy analysis. And it really says, what business are you in and what are your core competencies? So PACCAR is in the truck assembly business. Our core competency is not making the parts, but assembling the trucks. So mandatory sources supply, buying from Dynacraft is an example. We're often told we have to buy from Dynacraft for profitability reasons. Emergency sources, the planners will use these. These are smaller firms that they can get critical items from. And small and historically underutilized businesses, special programs for sourcing from minority and disadvantaged suppliers are developed, not so much in our industry, but in the consumer products industry, much more so. And then there's cooperative and consortium buying. So several organizations combine their purchasing power in the marketplace to gain leverage and reduce costs. You got to be careful with these because they can be antitrust violations. But you see this a lot with school districts will combine their buying together with a cooperative or consortium. Hospitals will also do the same thing. Joint ventures, it's a third company that's formed by 2 or more organizations. So you can share cost, technology, and knowledge. The one that comes to mind here is PACCAR and Cummins and another firm have all created a joint venture to make batteries for battery electric vehicles. And then subcontractors or sub-tier suppliers. The buyer can buy a complete modular system from a subcontractor who buys the parts and integrates them in the whole. This is how most of our supply base works. We buy from the tier 1, the tier 1 buys from the tier 2, and the tier 2 buys from the tier 3, etc. So existing sources versus new sources. The more critical the product, the more the buyer should evaluate changing sources. Some considerations are market conditions. Once one source means the buyer must maintain greater surveillance. Should be one source, not once. And product complexity. Expensive molds or tools make the decision to switch much harder. We run into this a lot. Also, proprietary processes or patents making switching suppliers a lot harder. Technology changes. Suppliers can own patents or be experts in new processes. Urgency of need. If you need something quickly, a new supply source is not the way to go. And quality expectations. If the supplier's quality is marginal, and we run into this a lot, we often will switch. How does the supplier produce and distribute the product? What's the new supplier outsource? What are the supplier's manufacturing processes? These are kind of questions you look at on a new supplier. Adequacy of competition. You may want to bring on new suppliers to bring in more competition and get better pricing. And cost versus value. So purchase price may be as little as a third of the cost of ownership. Things like quality, technical support, continuity of supply, innovation, all factor into a total cost of ownership. Short and long-term requirements. New suppliers can help protect the supply lines. Established suppliers that have proven that they can deliver cost, quality, and delivery, the ones you want to go with. Long-term or strategic relationships. So what you're trying to do is create a competitive advantage for PACCAR with these strategic relationships. We have strategic relationships with companies like Cummins and Eaton, a lot of powertrain component type things. And the reason PACCAR doesn't change suppliers is it's expensive, and then there needs to be a significant cost differential to make us change to a new supplier, or there needs to be a problem with the old supplier. Supply-based rationalization and optimization. These are two terms that you'll hear a lot. Identify the key suppliers that supply the majority of goods and consolidate the supply base as far as possible to eliminate smaller suppliers that you're not spending a lot of money with. Change in the supplier's organization. You have to watch out for this. The likelihood of discontinuity in the supply chain may increase if the supplier undergoes things like the retirement of key personnel, like CEO, mergers or takeovers, divestiture of products. All of these things can lead to a change in direction of the supplier. And it may be that they're going away from trucking customers to automotive customers, which means we aren't going to get very good service in the future. Supply continuity. Buyers should have a contingency plan in case things like strikes, natural disasters, capacity constraints. These are all things that bother us on a daily basis that we have to have plans for. And then you can find suppliers on internet-based searches through databases and online buying guides, ThomasNet. These are all good guides, but they usually require a subscription. You can also find suppliers in trade shows. I don't know that they really have printed periodicals anymore. A lot of this stuff is online. And then your peers in organizations like ISM, you can talk to people that find out what they're buying in these things, who their suppliers are. And then capacity and utilization. The relative size of the supplier's revenue in relationship to the buying organization can give an indication of whether the supplier can accommodate the organization's needs. So usually we want to be between at least 5% of the supplier's revenue, but no more than about 35% of the supplier's revenue. Because if we're more than 35%, then the supplier becomes dependent on us. And if we cut our production because we're a cyclical company, it can cause that supplier a lot of problems. Here's a little thing on mastering supplier identification and qualification. It's from ISM. You can read it at your leisure. All right, so for today, we got one question here. A supply manager is assigned the responsibility to define a sourcing strategy for an organization whose products are highly complex and demand a high level of quality. Production downtime can result in the organization paying customers for late or missed deliveries. When developing the sourcing strategy, all of the following should be considered except which one doesn't belong. Any
D.
guesses? Yeah, I would go with D. 'Cause that's the other ones kind of fit together. D's kind of out there. Let's see what these guys say. D it is. All right, there's some questions out on the chat. So let's do questions 1 through 7. And I'll go over answers at about 2:25. You might not be able to get through all of them, but give it a try. Okay, let's go over some answers. You may not have gotten through all of them yet, but I will post these answers in the chat so you can look over them later. So number 1 is Charlie, which I don't agree with, but you know, Because the supply manager will need to find sources that are of higher quality and can deliver a little lead time, needs to go with full and open competition. I actually like Delta better. But they say supply continuity is a characteristic that should be a requirement with any new supplier. But it's probably what I would focus on. But the answer is Charlie. 2 is Bravo. Because market exploitation involves taking advantage of change in focus of the marketplace. Another question I don't like, but you know, it's the way it goes. 3 is Alpha. Because the benefits of dealing with local supplier, willingness to tailor buying, may be balanced, and you're looking for a least. 4 is Charlie. So this one you knew was either going to be single or sole sourcing. They like single sourcing. It's practice of concentrating the purchases and preference over the others. Sole sourcing when there's only one source available. Though partnerships and strategic alliances can be part of local multiple sole sourcing, they're usually more likely in the environment of single sourcing. Yes and no, but 5 is Alpha. Currency exchange risks are part of financial risk assessment rather than analysis for infrastructure. 6 is also Alpha. Because sourcing from other countries requires analysis of different political laws and regulations, etc. And 7 is Bravo. The suffix poly or polys refers to sellers. So in a monopoly, one seller, and an oligopoly, few sellers. Market power resides with the sellers. And the suffix Sony or Sony's refers to buyers. So poly is sellers and Sony is buyers. So a monopsony means one buyer and an oligopoly means few buyers. In either case, market power resides with buyers. In pure competition, market power resides with the mini market itself. All right. Any questions? If not, I will talk to you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.